set collection games, heft, and game resurrection. Join us for these topics and more today on the Passport Game Studios podcast, where adventure awaits. Hello, I'm Chaz Marler, welcoming you to another episode of the Passport Game Studios podcast. But I'm not alone. We have a full set of panelists on today's show. Collect them all. Let's meet the rest of the participants for today's discussion, Ryan and Scott. Good to see you again, Ryan.
Hey, good to be here again.
Thank you. And joining both myself and Ryan is Scott in this corner. Good to see you again, Scott.
Good to see/hear you again.
Thank you. It's good to be seen/heard. So today's topic is going to be set collection, but let's kind of break the ice with one another by quickly just going over sharing which games we've been playing. For example, my wifey and I recently took another stab at Marvel Legendary. And as usual, Apocalypse took the day and took the win. And so we've defeated Red Skull and we've defeated others, but we just cannot seem to get Apocalypse under control. So what about you guys? What have you been up to?
I can say I've most recently been playing a lot of Food Chain Magnate. I introduced it to a group of my regulars, and everyone is kind of addicted to it right now. Last week we played the Gallerist, and while I was setting up and teaching the Gallerist, they were just contemplating moves in Food Chain Magnate. They were going, I could be building my or buying my my executive VP right now. I could be making my big marketing push or whatever the case was. It was pretty funny. Their head is wrapped around that big time, and I've been enjoying it a lot too. So yeah, it's been super fun.
Sugar plum fairies and pizzas and lemonade.
That's right. That's exactly right.
It's awesome. I've been on a different path. I've been playing a 2-player game. I picked up a game while I was traveling at the Mox Boarding House, which is a great game store out in Seattle. If anyone is near there or traveling there, I highly suggest go check it out. They had a game called Fight for Olympus, which is a 2-player game, specifically only 2-player. And you're basically taking control of these like famed Olympians, and it's like Hercules is in there and Alexander is in there, and it's like there's all this fighting back and forth over 3 areas, but it's a game where the cards are multi-use and you have options for how to use them and when you want to use them, and it's really a fun 2-player game. I was really taken by surprise from it, so I've enjoyed it a lot.
Interesting. Well, there's a sampling of what we've all been up to recently. And like we did last time, let's just kind of cap this part of the conversation off with a little mini game here. Let's find out, of the 2 other games that were mentioned, which one would you rather have played? Ryan, between Fight for Olympus and Marvel Legendary, which one would you play next?
I would probably choose Fight for Olympus, and I'll say that because I actually got a sampling of it shortly after Gen Con. A friend brought it back, and we played like half of a game and didn't get a chance to finish it because we were in a public place that was shutting down. We didn't realize the time, and so we just had to like pack it up and leave. And it was really interesting, but I didn't get a chance to really see the whole thing to conclusion and see the flow of the game. All the way through. So I'm actually pretty interested in playing that one again, or actually completing a game of that one. Whereas Legendary I've played a lot. So yeah, Fight for Olympus. So
what about you, Scott? Marvel Legendary or Food Chain Magnate?
That's tough. I have played several games of both, and if I had to choose actual like Marvel Legendary versus Food Chain Magnate, I would choose Food Chain Magnate. Because I would probably want to get a few more games of that in right now. If I had to choose any Legendary, I'd probably try and get Firefly Legendary Encounters back to the table, because that destroyed us the last time we played it, and I would like to beat that one again.
There's a twist. You've put a twist on the answer there.
I have.
So Firefly is the Encounters version, similar to the Aliens one?
Very much, yeah. So yeah, you could like set collect Marvel Legendaries, I guess.
Nice.
Well, as for me, it's really a difficult choice because Food Chain Magnate is one that, pardon the pun, is really meaty, and I would like to really dig into that one more. But due to my curious nature, you are the third person now that I've heard positively mention Fight for Olympus. So now my curiosity is piqued, and I really want to find out more about what that game's about. So I would probably just barely lean toward Fight for Olympus between those two.
Cool.
Yes.
I think the big thing in that discussion is all three are pretty cool games.
Yeah.
Quite,
for sure.
actually, yeah. Yes. And quite a range there of different different types, too, which is kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah, 2-player, deck builder, and resource management.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to keep bringing a lot of heavier games to the table. That seems like what I've been playing a lot of lately, so prepare yourselves in future discussions.
Nice.
Yeah.
If you bring too many heavy games to the table, you're going to have to reinforce that table.
But I'm ching.
Da-dum-dump. Ba-dum-bump.
I may edit that out. All right, let's continue on to our main topic now, the set collection mechanism here.
The set collection mechanism has been done in a myriad of ways across multiple different games, but at its core focuses you around collecting either similar or different types of things together to then score them in some form or fashion.
Maximize your output or your points, yeah.
Yeah, I think set collection does not necessarily need to be all of the same type of something. You could be collecting a set of specifically different things.
The game here that we're going to use as our example for set collection as a starting point in the conversation is CV, or Curriculum Vitae. And in this game, players are actually creating the story of their life. And during the course of the game, people go from childhood through middle age all the way to old age as the game progresses. But when it comes to the actual mechanisms of set collection as used in CV, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who's going to go into a little more detail about why this is a good example.
Yeah, so CV is a very fun 2 to 4 player game that's going to let you roll dice, use those dice to then purchase cards that, as Chaz said, are going to be the story of your life, going from your early life to middle age to old age. The concept is that there are several different types of cards in the game. So there are games that will give you, or cards that will give you more knowledge. There are cards that will give you better health, better relationships, better jobs, things like that, and better possessions. And throughout the game, you're going to be given the choice of not just what to acquire and make part of your story of your life, but how you want to acquire or how many of them you want to acquire so that you can get points at the end of the game. One of the interesting things that I have really enjoyed about CV overall is that there's multiple paths to victory. You can get points by focusing on maybe 1 or 2 types of specific aspects of your life. So if you just wanted to focus on your health and your relationships, you could do that. And the more of those types of cards you get, the more points you're going to score by the larger the set is of those cards you've collected. The other option is that there are endgame goals. Some of them are public and some of them are private that only you can achieve, that may force you to collect sets of different things. You may be put in a position where you need to get points for having one of each type of card. So you want to have a job, a possession, a relationship, a health, and a knowledge, and you'll get points for that. So there's set collecting in the sense of everything is the same and getting points for those. And there's set collecting in the sense of variations. So you'll have different types of sets together that will give you points as well. The trick in that is you can't do it all. And you're always in a position of having only so many resources. So you have to make key decisions throughout the story of your life as to which direction you want to take it. And then ultimately, hopefully, leading you to the most points, having the most fulfilling life, and being able to win.
Now, so in that respect, I think that CV is a very good example of set collection. But one of the other things that CV focuses on too is what's called tableau building in a way. You're laying out these cards and kind of building these columns of cards in front of you. And so I was going to ask, what do you think is the difference between set collection and tableau building? Are they mutually exclusive, or do they in games where there is set collecting, are you always kind of also building a tableau of cards, or can they work independently, do you think?
I love the curveball questions. You want to take that one, Ryan?
Yeah, sure. I think they can be independent. I don't think they're inherently together, but I think a lot of times they are. So one of the games I was going to talk about when it comes to set collection is a award-winning game, Seven Wonders. It is one of the iconic games of our industry in the last 10 years or however long it's been out now, and it does set collection similar to CV in that you are doing a lot of different things, and you're trying to balance and maximize the sets that you're trying to build at any given point. There's tons of different things, directions you can go, but they do it in a card draft system where you're passing the cards around the table and so forth, instead of the table or the board that CV uses, right? But both of them kind of have that same kind of tableau building feel where you're setting up all these cards in front of you. Now, I don't think personally that is, like I said, I don't think that's inherent to set collection. I think you can have tableau building as a concept without set collection being part of it. But they are kind of related. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head here, and I'm coming up short, but of something where it has kind of a tableau feel where you're building up multiple things that all kind of play off each other in front of you. But I don't know. Set collection really does kind of play into that. So I don't know. That might be something where there's a little more overlap than we realize. So
I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that they're kind of like step siblings. They can work together, and they can be completely separate too. The two games that kind of popped to my mind around that question, and neither of these are the game that I was going to talk about. One is Deus, and the other is Imperial Settlers. And both of them are tableau building games, but they handle the set collections very differently. The game Deus, you want to get combinations of the same type, but you also want to diversify across horizontally in terms of different types. It's very similar to CV. You want to deepen your story of your life depending on certain aspects, but you may also want to go across multiple things to be able to get more points depending on the cards that are available to you. Whereas something like Imperial Settlers is a tableau builder, but it's so dynamic in terms of how things interact with each other, you're not necessarily collecting sets, so to speak. So, but I would say they are independently mutually related, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
The game that I was actually going to bring up around set collection is a game that I can never pronounce correctly. It's either Haipur or Jaipur, and I've heard it 50 different ways from Sunday. It's a two-player game. I guess I'm stuck on two-player games this week. Specifically, again, only two players. You can't play with three players. I guess you could play with four players if you wanted to be teams and argue with each other. But the idea of Jaipur/Haipur is that you are trying to become the best gem trader for the Sultan. And you use cards that you have access to. Your opponent has a hand of cards. Then you have cards in front of you. You're trying to set collect to then turn in those cards to get gemstones that are worth points. Some of them are worth variable points. You will get bonuses based on turning in certain number of cards. So if you set collect 4 or 5 of a kind and turn those in, you'll get a bonus. And then there is a very unique mechanic with camels, which are kind of a generic card that allow you to trade faster and use them to, get across the sands of time, so to speak, and get more of those valuable gems. But it is a very, very fast-paced game. You can play a two-player game in like 15, 20 minutes. It goes pretty quick. It's also a game that's surprisingly really good online on Board Game Arena. So if anyone wants to check that out, that's a good thing to check out too.
It sounds like, and I've admittedly never played Jaipur or Haipur, which are the only two ways I've heard it called, by the way, not 50, like you said. But
there you go.
But having never played it, it sounds like a streamlined or just maybe just a two-player version comparable to Splendor. Is that fair, or is it just the theme kind of coloring my...
Not necessarily. No, I mean, yeah, it's gem-related and it's card-related, but it's very different from Splendor.
Okay, fair enough.
For example, I enjoy Jaipur, Haipur. So.
Well, I'm going to walk right into this one because speaking of Splendor, that was my example.
That's right.
Yeah, because when I was thinking about this set collection, every game I thought of was collecting cards. And so I tried to think, is there any game that you are collecting maybe not only cards, but something other than cards for your sets? And actually, Splendor is one that came to mind, because in Splendor, you have this grid of cards, and you're using various colored gems as your currency to obtain more cards in these sets to power your engine to allow you to afford to buy more and more larger and larger cards to accumulate more gems. But the gems themselves are something that you can technically be collecting as well. You on your turn, you can go and get gems out of the bank as the action you take on your turn and collect them in the sets, which you'll be using as your currency. Now, I don't know if that aspect of it, that half, technically counts as set collection, but it was something I thought was kind of an interesting hybrid in a way, where you almost had two versions of set collection going on while you're playing the game. So my question to you guys is, are you buying that?
No, I would definitely agree. Splendor's a set collection
Sure.
game. I mean, it's at its core, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get 3 red cards to get a red gem, or
Right.
three red things to get that other thing.
Right.
So I would definitely not disagree with that.
Yeah. Here's a question that I just kind of came up with on the fly here, listening to our discussion. All of these games we've mentioned for set collection, and I would categorize CV, our game, in there as well. I would say are pretty light introductory type of games. They're not overly deep or complex. They're not heavy games, I would say. Do you think that the set collection mechanic is something that is inherently lends itself to more accessible, lighter games, or can you guys think of any heavier games that lean heavily on set collection? I mean, obviously there's going to be some heavier games that have a set collection, but how many of them can you think of any that use set collection as a core mechanic that are more involved than, say, a CV or a Seven Wonders or a Splendor?
That's a great question.
That is an excellent question.
I think the reason that it is so familiar to players is that a vast majority of the games we had grown up on involve set collection. When you think, well, for example, right, with us, what do we do for a living? We work for Passport Game Studios and we make board games. When we tell people that on the street, what's the first thing they say?
Like Monopoly?
Oh, like Monopoly? Yeah, exactly, right? That's like the first thing everyone goes
Sure.
to. At its core, while it's a roll and move, Monopoly is really about set collecting.
Sure.
Because you're trying to get, Boardwalk and Park Place, or whatever, combination of locations that you wanted to get. Yahtzee is kind of set collection. It's kind of poker set collection, but you're trying to, get the right things together to get the most points that you can get out of it. That's a little bit of a stretch, but it still has some familiarity there. And I think that if you look at a lot of the games that we grew up with, that's going to be at least a loosely overarching theme, if not at its core of what it is. So I think a lot of us who are raised on games like that can immediately identify with a game like this, like CV or Hypur or Splendor. And it makes it very easy to explain to somebody, hey, 3 of these gets you this many points, right? Things like that. I think that in terms of heaviness, that's a curious question. I will think about that while Chaz adds his color commentary to your question.
Well, at least thank you for buying me some time beforehand to mull over my answer. I think that by its nature, it does lend itself to being something that is more familiar when it comes to a game mechanism, because collecting and organizing things by color, shape, or similarity, grouping similar things, that's one of the first skills that we learn on this planet. It's one of the first things our brain does to try and figure out this world is instantly being able to look at something and categorize them and group similar things. So I think based on that familiarity by something that we are so accustomed to right off the bat, it lends itself to being a mechanism that just is a simpler one for us to grok and understand and incorporate into games.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I think you guys both made good points about that. So, Yeah, I'm just sitting here looking over my collection on my shelf as much as possible, and I can't really identify anything that I would categorize as a heavier game that really leans on that mechanic heavily. Just some that have it as a component, which I think is fine. I think you're right. I think because of its nature, it probably does just lend itself to that familiarity and that lightness, I guess.
I would say the one of the heavier games that I could think of in terms of just not like physical weight, obviously, but in terms of mental weight. And this is a stretch, like it's a bit of a stretch, is Voyages of Marco Polo, which has elements of set collection, but it is not necessarily something I would consider to be set collection. I'm sitting here looking at my games as well, and it's one that I don't get to play often because, quite frankly, it's a really hard game to teach, and it's a harder game for people to grasp because there is a lot going on. But there is some set collection in there, at least in the sense of where you're placing your houses and trying to connect things correctly to get that. Again, it might be loosely set collection, I think, but that's a heavier one. There are probably some Euro games we could throw in there that you would say have roots in set collection, but may not be set collection games on their own. I will throw a question out and see if we can have this conversation. One of the things that I really like about CV is that it's not just set collection, and there really are no rules about this piece of it, but it brings out a narrative. For example, one of my favorite card games to play is a game called Gloom, which is very dark, and you end up in a position trying to kill your family, and that's actually the goal, is you want to kill your family. And it's very tongue-in-cheek. It's not serious. It's very tongue-in-cheek and joking. Like, if you could picture Wednesday from the Addams Family making a game, that's what Gloom would be. CV does the same thing, and it does it kind of naturally. People get a card, and you get your college friends, and you play it, and you start talking about your buddies from college or your pals from college, and it seems to be this natural in development of story. And in my mind, I have a hard time thinking of a set collection game that actually drives that in such a natural way that when you teach it to people just start telling the story of their life.
Right. Yeah.
Can you guys think of a game that does that?
I've been using my comparison game of Seven Wonders. There's no way. I mean, and I love Seven Wonders. It's one of my all-time favorites. But when I draft, a wood shop or a military card, I'm not painting myself into a picture of like actually building up the kingdom of of Rhodes or whatever the case is. It's just cards. It's just set collection. Yeah. So I think that is something that's really unique to CV, which is pretty cool.
I agree. In fact, the concept of narrative in the gameplay is such a unique thing. I think that is something that we could easily come back to in a future episode as the topic of discussion. Because I'm also looking at all of the set collection type games on my shelf across from me, and I'm really having a hard time coming up with one that makes as consistently creates a narrative as you play like CV does.
There you have it. Differentiating factors.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
Those are actually a lot more in-depth, psychologically heavy questions than I was expecting set collection to lead to.
Right.
And all of those great questions that we've asked amongst ourselves will segue nicely to what I'd like to close out the show with, which is our official question from a viewer, which was originally asked by Josh Eisbrenner. But we're going to take Josh's question and we're going to put a little bit of a twist on it. We've got a little twist going on this time. Here is the query I pose forth to you, gentlemen.
It's serious.
Given unlimited resources and time, if you could publish any game that is out of print, what game would it be?
I guess my brain goes straight to actually a friend's game. Matt Hyra, who is a known game designer who works for Cryptozoic Entertainment, my former employer and good buddies of mine over there. They had a game in their early years called Hot Rod Creeps that was designed by Matt, which has since gone the way of the buffalo, or some actual extinct animal.
Hey, just for the record, my Bills are 2-2. Okay.
Hot Rod Creeps is it's a racing game at its core that is stylized in a very kind of Rat Fink kind of way. And it has a bunch of kind of wacky factions, some of which crossed over with other games they had published at the time, which was really clever. And it had an entirely modular board, so all the track was a bunch of interlocking puzzle piece, cardboard. So you could make a short track or a big massive track. It had jumps. It had a ring of fire you had to jump through at times, and all the racing was card driven. And so every faction had their own deck of cards that represented your tank of gas, and if your deck ever ran out, then you ran out of gas, had to go back to the last pit stop. Had this very interesting catch-up mechanic in that way. So if someone just pushed really hard and went way further ahead, they could get pulled back because they run out of gas or what have you. It had drafting mechanisms. It had cornering where you had to slow down, all those type of things you would expect in a light racing game. And yeah, I thought it was really fun, really clever, and very modular in how you could play it. So you could, again, like I said, do a short game, do a long game. It was very accessible and still had a good laugh, had some good randomness to it and so forth. So I would like to see that one come back into print. It's a lot of fun.
Good choice. What about you, Scott?
I am not going to name drop on my answer.
Oh, please. Name drop.
But hi, Matt, if you're listening. Unlimited resources, unlimited funds, unlimited time, all that stuff. My heart would tell me I would want to redo Hero Quest because I loved that as a child. But the game that I would probably choose is The Queen's Gambit, which is an Avalon Hill game that I just absolutely adore. And it's a game I kick myself for never buying, and now is like $600 on eBay because it's out of print. And it's a phenomenal game because there's kind of 3 games happening at once inside of it. And unfortunately, it was applied to The Phantom Menace, the original prequel for Star Wars, which most people would prefer to forget, and I understand why. There is no Jar Jar in the game, which is, I guess, a positive. But the concept of it is really cool, that you're having to balance 3 different main actions going on. It was kind of reprinted and lightened up with Star Wars Risk recently that came out.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really a very watered down version of it, though,
Okay.
if you have ever played the original. It gives the same feeling as Queen's Gambit in terms of managing 3 different main actions going on, but by nowhere is it the intensity of the game. And I think that's probably the thing that impressed me the most about Queen's Gambit, was there was such an intense struggle between the 2 players. Even once you get past the Phantom Menace piece of it, you're sucked into the battle between the Gungans and the lightsaber battle between Darth Maul and the battle in the palace, and all these things happening at once, that it's a very exciting and fun game. So I would choose Queen's Gambit.
Can I make that my second pick? Because I have never had a chance to play it, and I would love to see that back in print so that I could. And
there
I'm
you
not
go.
nearly the Phantom Menace hater that most people are, so I think I could appreciate it.
I'm not either. Yeah.
How about you, Chaz?
Well, I could go for the obvious choice, which is just to say HeroScape, but it's the easy answer. It's the obvious answer, I would think, of anyone who knows me especially. So I'm going to dig down a little bit deeper, one extra layer. I'm going to talk about a game by Richard Garfield. After Magic the Gathering was released in the early 90s, and this phenomenal hit, it was kind of a surprise to see Richard Garfield's follow-up game released between 96 and 98 was this incredibly unique game called Filthy Rich. And this game comes with, those little binders that have the 3x3 plastic grids that you put like sports cards in. The game actually utilizes 4 or 5 sheets of those, and the players will be getting these billboards that are little sports cards sized, and some billboards are just a single, and some of them span up to like 3 different cards. And what you'll do is the players will buy these billboards and put them into the slots on certain pages in this binder. binder. So since the binder pages are transparent, you can see all your billboards. But since there's like 5 pages of them, as more and more billboards are added to different pages, you'll start flipping back and forth between page 1 and page 5, and players' billboards will start covering up the other players' billboards. And the object of the game is each turn, one or more of the 9 slots in the grid is going to be rolled by dice, and it's going to pay out. So as other players' billboards start covering your own, you start competing for the advertising space and the money that it generates. It was completely unique. I have not seen anything like this game. And when it was released, the general consensus was, that's a heck of a thing. Let's go play something else. Yeah, and so if there was a game that I had the ability to spruce up, tighten up a few of the rules and mechanisms, and reintroduce, I think it would definitely be Filthy Rich.
Nice.
I hope that it goes without saying, but the irony that most people are probably feeling, having never heard of this game and seeing that Richard Garfield's follow-up to Magic the Gathering is a game called Filthy Rich. It's probably a bound.
Fantastic.
I had never heard of this game until you mentioned it, and for some reason, I say never heard of it, and in the deepest, darkest recesses of my mind, after hearing you describe it, I'm like, yeah, okay, now I remember that game. I just didn't remember the title. So
it's a horrible title.
Choice.
Horrible title. It's not a title that sticks out to you at all to convey what this game is about. But
see, there's the opportunity. You could go reach out to Lennar. You could license them from a billboard perspective. You could start to have the Lennar board games. It's all there. It's ready for you.
The pieces are sitting here right in front of me. It's so obvious.
That's it.
Well, I think I'm going to go apply for a business loan then, if you'll excuse me, gentlemen.
Good luck.
And in the meantime, until our next episode, you can also catch us online and also at Board Game Geek Con if you're going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area the week before Thanksgiving in November. Scott, where will we be?
We're going to be, like Chaz said, the week right before Thanksgiving. We're going to be in booth 305. And as most people know, BoardGameGeek.com con, I guess, I don't know how you say it, is focused around playing and players. So, Ryan, what are we going to be playing while we're there?
We're going to have a lot of our newest releases. So we'll have Three Wishes, we'll have Quartz, we will have Myth, and we'll probably have a couple other surprises that we're not going to confirmed just yet, but some other cool stuff by the end of the year that we should have at BGG.
Ooh, we're ending on a cliffhanger. What could those games be? Well, hopefully we'll all find out soon, and until then, we invite you to continue this discussion on set collection and the other topics discussed in this episode on our Facebook page at facebook.com/PassportGameStudios and on Twitter, where we are at Passport Games. And if you have a question that we may be able to answer on an upcoming episode, send it to us at either of those locations, being sure to include the hashtag PGS Podcast. But for now, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Passport Game Studios podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for the next installment, in which we'll be exploring another topic about board games and the board game industry. Between now and then, we'll also be posting some game overviews and playthroughs on our YouTube channel over at youtube.com/PassportGameStudios. We welcome your comments and questions and may even feature them on an upcoming episode. So contact us and let us know what's on your mind. Until then, thanks for joining us, and remember that not only board games, but life too is a journey where adventure awaits.